We're going to talk about the imperfect, or in French, the imparfait. When do you use the imperfect? Well, we're going to use it when we're describing something that was happening, used to happen, or what someone was doing. This is quite different from the passé composé that describes what someone did. There are 4 steps that we must follow in order to correctly conjugate verbs using the imperfect, and we'll talk about those. The very first thing you're going to do is write the subject. Well, what is a subject pronoun? Je, tu, il, elle, nous, vous, and the plural il, elle. The next step you're going to follow is to use the nous form of the verb in the present tense. So if we're working with the verb jouer, we are going to have to use the new form of jouer, which is jouons. Then our step 3 says we're going to drop the ONS, so we're going to do that. And the very last thing we're going to do is to add the imperfect ending to this stem, J-O-U. And you would use that for the entire conjugation. Do these steps apply to both regular and irregular verbs? Yes. Fortunately, they do apply to all verbs except one, and that one verb is être. But it makes sense why we cannot apply these rules to être to find our stem. And the reason being is because nous does not end in O-N-S. It ends in M-E-S. It's nous sommes. Because of that, we cannot use the typical rules to find the stem. What are your imperfect endings? Well, we have them here, and even though être has an irregular stem, it still uses the same endings as all other verbs, and those endings are AIS, AIS, AIT, IONS, IEZ, AIENT. And they're pronounced, these are like a boot. Everything inside this boot, the ending would be pronounced A. The new form, ion, and the vous form, ie. Here is an example of how I applied all of the steps to conjugate the verb regarder, which means to watch or to look at. Notice in the je form, I was watching or I used to watch. We have step 1, our subject. Step 2 is in red. We have regardons. Nous regardons. We dropped our ONS, so that left us with this red portion here, the stem. And then step 4, we added our imperfect ending of AIS. And we apply these rules for every one of these conjugations. Je regardais, tu regardais, il, elle regardait, nous regardions, vous regardiez, il, elle regardait. Now it's time for you to check your understanding. You may refer to your notes or look at other parts of this PowerPoint to assist you in translating these 5 sentences. Once you are done, you may go on to the next slide to check your answers. At any time, you can pause this presentation and go back to previous slides. Notice in number 1, we were dancing. The verb was danser. We applied all of our steps. We have our subject, we have our stem, and we have our imperfect ending. The same is true for number 2. We have our subject, we have our irregular stem of et, and we applied our imperfect ending. Notice because this verb is in the negative, you always sandwich the verb in between ne and pas. Because été begins with a vowel, we had to use n apostrophe as opposed to ne. The same is true with number 3. Don't forget the pas de rule. When you don't have a, an, or some of something, you must use the pas de rule. With number 4, I know IR verbs usually mess some of us up. Don't forget, when you're doing step 2, the verb maigrir in the new form of the present tense is maigrissant. We dropped our O and S. We were left with our stem. And then we applied the perfect ending. Last but not least, number 5, he used to send some letters to his grandpa. The verb is envoyer. Remember, we're using the new form, so even though it's il, we're not changing the Y to an I. We had nous envoyons. Sorry about my N. We drop our O and S, and we're left with this as our stem, and then we apply our imperfect ending. I hope this presentation has helped you to learn how to conjugate correctly with using the imperfect verb tense. I have an additional slide of practice problems, and I'll give you some time to work on these. Remember to follow your steps. Again, you may pause this presentation to allow yourself time to complete the problems. Here are the answers for the second check your understanding portion. Remember, the verb is s'endormir. We had en dormant. Oops, that's a D. I apologize. We dropped our O and S, and we applied our imperfect ending. Remember, mes parents is the same thing as the plural il. Number 2, AIT is your ending for L. And remember, qui uses the same thing as il, L. And the new form of the verb prendre, which means to take, is prenons. Prenons. We drop our O and S. Notice there is no D, there is no R. So that is why C has to be the answer. And number 4, you're talking about weather. So we take new of faire in the present tense. It's faisons. And then we add our imperfect ending. Il faisait si beau hier. It was so nice yesterday. If you have any questions, please jot them down and ask me when you come to class.